Bryan Johnson is a millionaire, an influencer, and a biohacker, which means someone who uses science and tech to improve their bodily functions and physical efficiency. But Johnson takes it many notches further. He's actually trying to defeat death. Yes, you heard it right. The Venice-based entrepreneur is obsessed with the idea of being a real-life Benjamin Button. In other words, he wants to age backwards. To that end, Johnson is investing $2 million a year into something called Project Blueprint, a reverse aging experiment that combines a rigorous diet and lifestyle, over 100 very expensive supplements, and tons of medical interventions, including plasma exchanges with his teenage son and his father. In his own words, it aims to measure all 70 organs of his body and then maximally reverse the quantified biological age of each. By his own claims, in 2021, while his chronological age was 44, his biological age was 36. And what's the target? Well, 18 is how old he ultimately wants to be. Johnson recently joined the ET and Times of India editorial team for them to get a glimpse into his quest for eternal youth. What I can say is that the conversation was anything but boring. Tune in.
Okay, Bryan, thank you so much for joining us. So first off, given our pristine air quality, is not dying an option in India?
Yes, I think India has so many things going for it. And so, the endeavor for what we've been trying to do for the past 4 years is figure out all the things that are making each of us individually and collectively die. So in the US, companies make these sugar cookies with 80 grams of sugar. That's really bad. In India, you have air quality that's not great. So every country has certain things which induce bad health. So the goal was to identify all of these things and then rank them according to effect, and then try to minimize those as much as possible.
Can you tell us, how did you embark on this audacious journey? What was the inflection point in your life that led you to this path?
I built a previous company, Braintree Venmo, which was acquired, and I made a lot of money in doing that. It was a fulfillment of a goal I had when I was 21 years old. And I was trying to figure out what to do next. And I did a thought experiment that helped me think through this clearly. So I imagined being present in the 25th century. So a few hundred years from now, and I'm there hanging out with people, whatever form they exist in at that point. And they're reflecting on our time period right now. And they say, we appreciate Homo sapiens that existed in the early 21st century so much because we now have expanded throughout the galaxy and we have this beautiful form of existence that was unfathomable to their primitive minds. And they express appreciation that we did two things. And I wondered, what do they say we did? And I think that they say two things. One is they say, that's the time when humanity gave birth to superintelligence. And it's also the time when they realized that death was no longer inevitable. That they compress our entire century into those two things. And so I wondered, if that's really the case, what would it be? What kind of experiment would I have to do to demonstrate the process of transitioning from death being inevitable to having an ambition that we can extend our lifespans to some unknown horizon?
Right. So, all of us here have been reading parts of your routine, including having dinner at 11:30 a.m.
Yeah.
Could you tell us, what does a day in your life look like?
Every day begins the night before. So sleep is the most important thing I do every single day, because how well I sleep determines the quality of the day I live the next day. So 8:30 p.m. I go to sleep on the dot. I'll sleep for roughly 8 hours and 34 minutes. That's my average over 6 months. And in that sleep, I recorded the best sleep score in human history, 8 months of perfect sleep. I wanted to demonstrate that you can get high quality sleep every night by following certain habits. And then I'll wake up around 4 to 5 in the morning, and then I'll do a 3 to 4 hour routine every day. So I'll do some red light therapy, exercise, I'll eat a bunch of vegetables, I'll do a few other therapies, but basically it's devoted to the science of I'm trying to, recently we shared that I achieved the best biomarkers of anybody on planet Earth. I shared 43 markers from my cardiovascular health to my bone mineral density to my speed of aging, that there's no human on planet Earth that has a better set of comprehensive markers, demonstrating that these protocols have great effect in actual data.
So Bryan, you often talk about this algorithm that governs your life, and you don't leave anything to choice because you feel like each time you make a choice, you make a mistake. What is this algorithm? Is it a team of researchers? Is it like an actual app that tells you what to do every day? How does this really work?
There's a team of 30 medical professionals on the Blueprint team, and we choose them based upon their specialties. So someone may specialize in the heart, one may specialize in DNA methylation patterns, and then we combine all their expertise, we look at all the scientific literature, and we come together and formulate a plan, and we say, our hypothesis is the following thing, and we're going to test the following protocol. And then we do it, and then we measure to see if it worked, and then we do it again and again. And so the past 4 years has been a series of finding evidence, having a hypothesis, testing it, and looking at the data, and then redoing the whole entire process again.
So are we moving to an age, or do you want a future where every individual has their own algorithm? Is that something you want to sort of commercialize?
Yes. So in the same way that, like when I came here today, the person that was driving the car put the address in, and then an application determined what streets to follow. And now that application has more data on the traffic patterns in India. It knows where the busy spots are, what roads to take, far more than the driver could ever know. And we trust these algorithms because they do things, they do a better job than we could on our own. And so it's inevitable that at some point in time that algorithms will have more data on our body than we do, and it will know things we can't know at a speed we can't know them. And so yes, it's just inevitable. In the same way we use an application to navigate our way to a destination, we'll use an algorithm to manage our health. So it's inevitable. It's just guaranteed to happen.
So do you want to make that available to the wider, right?
Yes.
Okay. For the benefit of everyone, what is the don't die philosophy? Is it about health? Is it about living forever? What is at the core of this philosophy, and why do you want to bring it to India?
Yeah, it is founded upon the contemplation of, if you look at planet Earth right now and you try to quiet all the noise and you try to deduce what is the most important thing happening on this planet right now, I think there's only one thing happening. We're giving birth to superintelligence. So AI is progressing at a speed that is faster than we can understand, and it's going to change our society unfathomably. AI is going to be superior to us in many ways. It's going to call into question what we do for jobs. It will call into question who we trust for governments. It will call into question who manages knowledge. So it will basically introduce all these new questions about our society. And so the most relevant question on planet Earth is, what do Homo sapiens do when you give birth to superintelligence? Now, when you raise that question, it raises all kinds of things, politically, economically, socially, morally, ethically. So then as a society, we say, okay, who has answers? Like US, do you have answers? India, do you have answers? China, do you have answers? Now, everyone has their own ways of doing it. You say, okay, democracy, okay, capitalism, okay, religion. And so it's an observation that there's no existing form of human thought that can answer the questions for this moment. No one has the answers. And so Don't Die is an attempt at filling that space. This is true throughout history, that when large technological shifts happen, new ideologies emerge to answer practical questions. And so the Don't Die philosophy is trying to answer what we do as a species when you're giving birth to a form of intelligence that is far superior than your own. And so it's don't die individually, don't kill each other, don't destroy the planet, and align AI with Don't Die. It basically integrates all ideologies, all philosophies, and all systems into one thing that we humans can agree upon. And so the thing that I find elegant about Don't Die is, one, it's the only thing that every human on this planet agrees to. The only thing. We don't want to die right now. There's nothing else that all 8 billion of us agree upon. Right. And so the second thing is also, this is a bit of an advanced point, but it's technical in nature. So it's computational. So if you go to AI and you say, AI, we want you to do the following thing. If you say, do democracy, that's a very subjective thing. It's more of an art than it is a science. And Don't Die is computational. You can say, you can look at the laws of physics and also whether something's dying or not. So it lends itself to being an elegant framework for how we actually work as a species together to address this moment.
But Brian, algorithms come with their own biases and flaws, right? And AGI is supposed to outsmart us.
Yes.
who takes responsibility in that scenario? For example, if the algorithm prescribes you something that actually is bad for you, where does safety and accountability come if you're so reliant on these algorithms?
Yeah, it's a lot like other. So when the U.S. So I'm from the U.S. and so I have this framework. When the U.S. was 13 colonies and decided to become a country, they transitioned from the monarch, the British, to having their own form of government in democracy. Now, at that point, they were just pointing in the direction to say, we think we can do a better job managing our own way of government. We can elect our own officials, we can make our own decisions. We don't want a monarch making decisions. It wasn't that they had all the questions answered. They didn't know about how to divide states and federal rights. They didn't know who could vote and why. And so the same thing is true with Don't Die. We don't know the answer to a lot of things, but you're basically saying we're going to point this in the right direction. Because otherwise, like, what direction do you point AI in? You know, do you say, what are we maximizing for as a species? Is it to make more money? Is it to acquire more power? Who does it benefit? Who does it hurt? And so Don't Die takes into account the universal nature of human existence. And it says everyone's want to exist is equal as a starting point. All countries, all people, all situations. And so it's a remapping of how we think about existence as a species.
But even if I don't want to die today, given the state of the world, I have no desire to live forever either. There are wars and there's just so much going on. And I feel many people may share that sentiment. So what are we really living for if the world that we're living in is so much in chaos?
Yeah. I love this story where this woman was a nurse and she took care of ALS patients, where you lose your musculoskeletal ability to control your muscles, and so you basically deteriorate to a point where you can only communicate by blinking your eyes, and then you don't even have that anymore. And she made this comment in passing to her family. She said, if I'm ever like this, just pull the plug, let me die. And the sad thing about, so the ironic thing is she came down with ALS and she lost all of her abilities, and she was in a bed and all she could do was blink to communicate. And when they asked her if they wanted her to pull the plug, guess what she said? No. So humans are very, very, very bad at thinking they understand what they want in the future. But when it comes down to it, if you ask anybody, even somebody in the worst possible physical situation, do you want to live tomorrow? They'll usually say yes. It's just when you get to a time point where you say 10 days from now or a month from now or 20 years from now, we discount that time so badly, we're like, we'll just give up. But when that moment arrives, nobody wants to die. And that's why Don't Die is so elegant, it's the universal human want.
Bryan, many experts have questioned the lack of external validation of your protocol, because right now it's pretty much in-house, even though you open source everything and you share everything with the public. How do you sort of respond to that criticism? Do you have any plans to validate your methods from external scientific community?
Yeah, so the methods we use are all based upon the best scientific evidence.
Right.
So it's not even on my protocol. So we went through, the thing we did that was unique is we went through all of the scientific literature and we identified the studies that had the very best evidence, and we used those population studies on me. And so this is not a protocol based upon my body or my biomarkers, it's population evidence applied to me. So it can be equally applied to everybody, all ages, males and females. And so really the starting point is it's from the best evidence, not from me.
You mentioned yesterday at the event that you're down to 40 pills a day. I think it started somewhere in hundreds or more. Is there a goal there, or how does that work?
So we're trying to do two things. One is I'm trying to be like my son. I'm trying to be age 18 in every organ of my body. And so we would succeed if you took a blood draw from him and a blood draw from me and we're identical. If you did a full body MRI and a full body MRI of me and you couldn't tell the difference in bone structure, muscle structure, organ structure, that's the goal. Now that's very ambitious. It's probably more than we can do right now. That's goal number one. And then goal number two is we want these systems and practices to be throughout all of society, that we do this as a system, so it doesn't burden the individual, it just happens by default.
You've recently commercialized some of the products. You've started selling your own olive oil, your chocolates. Can you tell us what is your business vision with this protocol and which markets do you want to take this to?
It was never my intent to build a business. So I did this as a scientific experimentation. I did this for several years. It went viral. And the number one request we got from people was, please make this easy. So we said, okay, we'll do it. And what we've done is, so when we were building Blueprint, we were testing everything I was putting into my body. So every supplement I took, we were testing, does it have what it says it has? And does it have any toxins in it? We did that with supplements and foods. And as you might imagine, what we found is that most companies, the products do not have what they say they have, and actually are very toxic. They have a lot of environmental toxins in them. And so to solve that, we went out and built our own food supply chain from around the world, buying all the ingredients for the supplements and the foods. And now we've built what I think is the cleanest food supply chain in the entire world. And all of our products have third-party lab results. And so basically we have a rule now is I don't eat food that doesn't have a third-party lab result. So the premise is food is guilty until proven innocent.
Bryan, is this a pursuit for the wealthy?
So when I came here, I flew on a commercial airline and I flew business class. So you walk onto the airplane and the first thing they give you is alcohol. That wrecks your sleep. Then they sit you down and they give you a meal, which wrecks your sleep. Then they have a screen in front of you that you watch movies, has blue light, it wrecks your sleep. So they serve you this luxurious die. So the ironic thing is when you make money and have wealth, oftentimes they're in worse health than they did otherwise. So, and when someone doesn't have money, they can do the same things that are free. And so ironically, the wealthy are some of the most unhealthy people on the planet.
But I think we all know people, at least I do, who've, not ever had a drop of alcohol, they sleep well, they do all these things, but they still get cancer or they, get heart attack, etc. Because life can be overwhelming and responsibilities can be a lot. How do you reconcile with that reality that there's only so much you can control?
Yeah. I mean, this is the primary message that I'm trying to convey, is when death is inevitable, you optimize for certain games. It could be professional success. It could be your religious and spiritual, and you think that there's an afterlife. Or it could be that you want to have children and pass on your genes that way. When death is not inevitable, you play different games. And so our society is built on this premise that we're all going to die. And if we're all going to die anyways, we might as well do the following things. If we don't die, we change what society means, and existence becomes the highest virtue. So I'm suggesting we're on the verge of the biggest evolutionary step in our entire history, where existence becomes our virtue. And that means we would change political systems, economic systems, morals, ethics. It would all follow in suit that we acknowledge societal health, our collective health, is the most important thing we have as a species.
But I think Steve Jobs said in his commencement address that remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make big choices. Knowing there is an end makes you prioritize things, makes you maybe even live more fully. If mortality were removed and life became endless, how would individuals think about purpose and clarity?
Yeah. There's an endless number of explanations that humans give to rationalize death, and none will stand the test of time. So when death is inevitable, humans are incredibly elegant to tell stories of how there's an afterlife, or that it's really a virtuous thing because it motivates you, or it really helps a new cycle of people come along. So people are eager to justify it and rationalize it. But the moment we figure out that we can start extending our lifetimes, our lifespans, everyone's going to move in the opposite direction. And soon it's going to be fashionable to say the best thing you can do is extend your lifespan. Like, we know this in humans. Like, humans make up stories to justify anything. Those aren't truths. They're just simply cope with death being inevitable.
Bryan, do you believe that in your lifetime humans will achieve immortality, or will
Yes.
achieve?
If you simply look at the advancement curves of AI, of how much intelligence we're bringing online, like, I think in the next 5 years alone, it's reasonable to imagine we will accomplish 100 years of discovery in the next 5 years. That's bold, but you look at the patterns of how, like AI right now, the best agents, like ChatGPT, the recent model, it's about as good as an intelligent high schooler. Some are like PhD level. The models in 2027 will be on par with the world's best AI researchers. So AI will be as good as the world's best AI researchers at developing its own self in 2 years, maybe 1 year from now. That's the point in time where there's a jumping off point, where it becomes better at developing its own self than we are. That's where we're at as a species. It is unfathomably a transition moment that we can't comprehend. And so this is what I'm saying is like any idea we have about reality, any quote about life or death, any quote about how we understand the world is not going to stand this moment. We are walking into a brand new existence. Now, like to put this in context, like imagine if you travel back in time and you're hanging out with Homo erectus. That's 1 million years ago. And you're interviewing Homo erectus. Like we have this kind of situation. You're saying, Homo erectus, please tell us, what is the future of the human race? Like, what are we going to become? And they may say, well, let me tell you about, we're going to have new methods of hunting and new methods of gathering, and we're going to travel to different continents. But they wouldn't be able to tell you about the microscopic world of biology, or about quantum mechanics, or about the expanse of the universe, or about these smartphones you hold in your hand, or about these pills you take as to cure infection. So they had no models to say anything intelligent. And so this situation raises the question, are we basically Homo erectus right now? Do we basically know nothing about the future? Can we say nothing intelligent about the future? Are we that primitive? And I think we are. And so it really invites this extreme level of humility. We have no idea what's coming. Now in context, like when I went to college 20 years ago, I could say I'm going to study blank, I'm going to become blank and do blank until I retire. Talmadge is 19. He just finished his first year in college studying math and physics. But what does he study to be in the job force 2 years from now? Nobody knows. Well, what jobs will be around? Nobody knows. We can't see a year or two into the future. And so this raises the question of like, what do we do as a species? And that's why this invites, what is the ideology what do we do as a human race? What does India do? What does the US do? What do we all do? And so it's this really essential question. We need to bind together and figure out something to do together. Otherwise, we have risks that we may not be around.
Just theoretically, if you have a large enough population that adopts your protocol and they live longer and longer, what does it mean eventually for the kind of pressure? You have a birth rate and you have a death rate for the world, different for different countries. What would it do for the pressure it will put on the resources, on everything, on housing, on transport, on just natural resources? Is that a worry?
Yeah.
Because if you had just another billion people, in addition to the people who are just being born, what does it do for the for the earth? You can say that we go and live a bonus as things are.
Yeah.
If this is the only planet that we have, what do you say to that?
Yeah. My read of history is that rarely do humans at any time and place accurately predict the problems of the future. Like they imagine what problems may become, and then the actual problems are different than what they imagined. Like for example, in New York, when horses were the primary mode of transportation, there was so much manure in the streets of New York that people didn't know what to do. The Hudson River was filled with it. It was all over the streets. It was causing disease. And everyone said, like, this is like an unsolvable problem. And then Henry Ford made the Model T, and all the horses went away, and so did the manure. And so they thought manure was the existential problem. Then cars came along and solved it. Now cars made other problems, but they still missed the point. And so the question, I agree with you, like it's a relevant question. It's also one I take in stride to say, rarely has any generation ever correctly identified future problems. They're usually always wrong in certain ways. And I think the same is true here, especially when you're introducing AI and it's changing the landscape so dramatically. I don't know if we can fairly map over the assumptions we've carried up into this point.
What do you see as the purpose of any model?
I think to properly answer that, you need to look at our future selves. So right now, if you were to answer that question, you might respond with a framework of how people in Indian society understand the meaning of life, right? That's the kind of answer you get in this context, or in the US or in China. And everybody would give you their own contextual things like, I think the meaning of life is blank, or the purpose of life is blank. But if you pose that question in 2030 or 2040 or 2060, we would give you dramatically different answers, right? All of us would. Like, time's gonna change. And so whatever you say is basically a very ephemeral thing of that time and place. And what I'm suggesting is, when you give birth to superintelligence, existence becomes the highest virtue. That in itself, that right now we drive primarily upon meaning making and purpose. We want very simple answers like this or that. And I'm saying that we would transition in society to say the fact that we exist is the virtue. Now, like, what you do after that, like, we can play all of our games, everybody can have their own purpose. But right now, when death is inevitable, we just YOLO our way to all of our decisions, right? It cascades down, whether it's debauchery or whether it's some ideological purpose. And so I'm suggesting, like, we really have a hard time saying anything intelligent about the world right now because we're up against this wall of progress of AI.
Have you had any near-death experience?
Several.
Several.
Yeah, I learned to fly an airplane. I was with my children and we accidentally flew into a storm and we nearly died.
Bryan, yesterday you talked about how you were depressed for a decade and how you nearly didn't used to be nearly as healthy as you are today. So could you talk a little bit about when you were a civilian, as it were, before you embarked on this journey, and then what caused you to embark on this journey?
Yeah. So I had depression for 10 years, and it's a really unbearable existence. My mind was constantly telling me that life was hopeless and I should commit suicide. It was just on this non-stop loop. And I would have done it had it not been for my children. And so I have deep empathy for anyone in that situation. And the thing I learned from that is I don't trust my thoughts. When a thought lands in my brain, it's just something my brain did, but I can observe it for what it is, but it's not me. It's not my emotion. It's not my thought. And so questions like this, like the purpose of life, I try to watch this emerge almost with humor. But that was really one of the most formative experiences in my life. And so it really helps me now when I say, like, what is the future? What do I want in the future? What are my ideas about the future? I kind of laugh in the same way of, like, I'm probably Homo erectus. I probably have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm probably very primitive. But we humans like to fill this unknown space with our knowing to make us feel better. We don't like to leave the unknowing unaddressed. So.
I'm just curious, Bryan, what do you think of, traditional medicine as we know it? Like, when we fall sick or there is a serious ailment, we resort to that. What's your point of view on that? And what do you do when you or your son is sick? Like, what do you practice? Is it something of your own from your protocol, or do you embark on, the traditional form of medicine that we know?
Yeah. So one thing I'm very excited about is AI tools are now almost as good as doctors, and in many ways better than them.
What do you mean by AI tools?
If you just take something like ChatGPT's latest model or Claude's latest model, you can give them, so we have a system we've built where you can basically assemble a whole bunch of data on the biomarkers, a whole bunch of prompt engineering, and say, we have all these specific conditions. Can you please diagnose this for me? And it far outperforms any doctor. And so it takes all of your data, and it's looking at the scientific literature of papers published. Like, if you're a doctor, you probably haven't read a scientific paper in 10 years or 20 years. Like, you're well behind where the science actually is. And so these models take into account all the latest science and your data in real time. And so that's why I really am very, very bullish for everybody in this room. It's not just the wealthy. These tools are democratized. And when you have that access, because, like, we all know, if you have a health concern and you go into a medical system to try to solve it, it's hard.
So are you suggesting that I go to ChatGPT and tell them my medical history and take suggestions in terms of what I should be prescribed?
I'm saying,
is that safe?
Yeah, I'm saying it is a wonderful approach to educate yourself on what knowledge is accessible to become informed. So when you go to your doctor, you can say, I think the following things are possible, and I think the following options are possible. Do you think this is true or false, and why? But you at least go into that conversation knowing a rough parameter set of what to talk about, and then you can have that dialogue with your doctor. Now, the doctor, they're also getting, they also are using these AI tools. So they can take your input and then do their same process. And this is why it's so powerful. Now you have it coming from both sides, which is it's a much more robust model for health, for everybody, for the doctors, for you. So I've seen so many of my friends, and like as a family, we've gone through this. It is so much better than the way we do it now, which is you just go to the doctor, you're like, I feel blank, what's happening? And the doctor says, here's a prescription, take this drug. Like, you know, and that rarely works.
You still go to the doctor, right? But you're
Yeah.
just going with the research that the AI tools are doing for you.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll give you an example of like something we found that would be very hard to find in a medical system. So I was having these piercing headaches. I would wake up at night and my head would be pounding. And I thought I had COVID, it was during COVID. And so I'd go take a test, it wasn't positive, so I couldn't figure it out. So I had a whole body MRI, just looking at like a pre-screen, cancer, tumors, doing a baseline of my organs. And the technician randomly found that I have a narrow jugular vein. So this vein coming from my brain to my body is genetically narrow, which means I have a hard time getting blood from my brain to my body. And it was being exacerbated because of my poor posture. So I was sitting something like this or looking at my phone like this, and the poor posture, yeah, everyone.
Cue, on cue.
On cue, yep. Like imagine a string above your head. So my poor posture was basically limiting my blood flow from my brain to my body. And so I was able to do physical therapy, correct my posture, and improve the blood flow. That lowered the biological age of my brain by 9 years, according to my white matter hyperintensities. It was a dramatic correction. My headaches went away, my sleep improved. So it led to this whole series of changes of my posture, my physical therapy. Now that never, ever would have been solved by the traditional medical system, right? It happened only because of the MRI, only because we fed the data to the MRI, to the AI system. So like we've seen so many examples of this process where it just repeats on insight after insight that we can't do. And this is why this moment is so special, is it's transcending all of our human systems, and it's taken us to levels that we couldn't reach into before.
I was sent by Sujan to visit different sites for aging research. And I remember when I went to the Kogod Center for Aging in Mayo Clinic, they had found that the combination of dasatinib and quercetin would act by removing senolytic cells.
Yep.
And reduce the age of the person by about 15 years. And they had already used it on primates, and they had started using it on patients with progeria. So have you used any of these? Are you waiting for FDA, which will take 15 years, so then we come back to the same where we are now? Or do you believe in using them before FDA approves of it, and you would like to start using products like this?
Yeah, we don't wait for the FDA. We think we are better than the FDA in many ways. Yeah, there are limitations with N=1, so once you consider that, but our ability to quantify things, we think we can move with a rigor, like somewhat safety, so we do not wait for the formal process. But yeah, I've done 3 cycles of dasatinib and quercetin. So 50 milligrams of dasatinib, 500 milligrams of quercetin, for 3 days, once a month for 3 months. And so we saw interesting effects where you did see some senescent clearance from doing that. We also saw an increased speed of aging. So DNA methylation patterns kicked up. So this weird effect.
What kicked up?
DNA methylation patterns. So you basically, the methyl pattern showed that I was aging faster when doing this analytics. And so we're finding these really interesting effects where you would normally think that it has a reduction of age effect, but actually temporarily increased my speed of aging for 3 months. So even though it cleared out senescent cells, the methyl patterns increased. So it's just like everything kind of cuts both ways. So we've learned to be very humble that these things have very complicated effects. They're multivariable, and then like trying to isolate is very hard. So we at least have like some data on it. Which is like, I guess what I'm saying, like the FDA, like even if you were to do a robust study, it's very hard to, even with a large cohort, it's very hard to isolate all those effects. right? Because you do something very narrow. So I like that we're doing, there's limitations with our study, but I like that we can see many variables at one time because we're measuring from so many different vantage points.
You mentioned metformin, but you did not say anything about rapamycin.
See, he gave it up. He said it did work well.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, so we just discontinued that in September. So we were on rapamycin for almost 5 years. And so I was on a protocol where I was doing 6 milligrams once per week, then 6, then 13 biweekly, and then 6, 12. And then we measured my blood rapamycin levels. So I would take the dose and I would, with fat to increase the absorption, then measure blood levels 2 hours, 24 hours, 48, 72, 96, and see the half-life decay to figure out what my Cmax was, then the half-life decay. And rapamycin was like the most promising drug in the field. If you said, what do most anti-aging scientists agree upon, you probably had more agreement on rapamycin than anything else.
More than metformin.
More than metformin. Yet, it messed up my lipids, it messed up my blood glucose, it gave me a higher resting heart rate, and I had small tissue infections. So I had a very high side effect profile. And so we finally just said, the side effects are not worth it. And after getting off it, my lipids corrected, blood glucose corrected, resting heart rate went down 10%, and soft tissue infections went away. So it's complicated. So we stopped the most promising anti-aging drug after 5 years. We don't think the effects are worth it. The side effects are worth it.
Why did it take you 5 years to discover that your lipids and that's why? Isn't there a way that you can find out much, shorten that cycle of discovery and 5 years is a long time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because we were trying to isolate effects of other things. So we've been trying to cycle through like senolytic protocols, dasatinib and quercetin. We were looking at caloric restriction. So we started basically to say, like, how do we take all the best science and put it into one person at one time? Now, if you sequence that slowly, it'll take you a long time to get through those things. So we went through pretty quickly on adoption, and then we've been trying to peel things away to isolate effects. So it's just like whether you want to do the experimentation on the front end or the back end. So we did a process of elimination on some things. That was one.
Do you ever get angry?
Do I get angry?
That's a yes.
We haven't had a fight a single time in our life.
You still not answer the question.
If he says yes, will you get angry?
I don't think I do.
You don't.
I don't think I really don't get angry. And like he said, like we have never had a fight in our entire lives. He's never been sent to his room. He's never been in trouble. No, we just like we.
Yeah.
There's 2 other siblings too. Same with them.
So Bryan, Dr. Atia talks about NMN, resveratrol, and metformin as a protocol.
Yeah.
What's the minimum a lay person can do to have some kind of a longevity protocol?
The most powerful drug on the market is sleep. Sleep. Unquestionably. And then the second most powerful drug on market is exercise. And the third most powerful drug on market is proper nutrition.
What is your view on using continuous glucose monitors and levels or anything like that to constantly keep the spikes of glucose low? And
Yeah,
do
we
you recommend it for everybody, or?
Yes, absolutely. Like it's great to see that technology around, right? It's very easy to wear. We do it all the time. And so we keep my blood glucose in a range of roughly 14 from baseline to spike. So I basically don't move throughout the entire day. So I have a very low glycemic index diet, and my blood glucose is very steady. My 14 points from baseline up, and my HbA1c is 4.7, so as low as it can get. So we've pegged my glycemic, so it's a perfect marker for us.
2 things actually I'd like to ask you. One is related to the gut microbiome. How do you regulate it? What probiotics do you advise? Is taking something like align to suppress the inflammation producing bacteria beneficial? Should one follow a program like Viome? So this is one question. And the other question is that a lot of aging is the result of the brain constantly going into the default mode network. And this going into the default mode network, which centers around the self or the ego, is the cause of all suffering, which is also agreed by science, and it's also agreed by Buddhism or Vedanta, whatever it is. So many drugs, for example, we talked about the use of ketamine.
Psilocybin.
Yeah. So these reduce the brain from slipping into the default mode network. Are you doing anything on these two directions?
Yeah.
One is the gut microbiome and the other is the default mode network.
Yeah, on the gut microbiome, my scientific team, their current opinion is they wish they knew what markers to focus on for the gut microbiome. That like they just don't view that the evidence has crossed a threshold where you can say this marker at this level for this reason. And so we're left doing these blunt instruments of we have a lot of plant fiber, we eat fermented foods, there's a few things I do on prebiotics, but we don't believe we can speak with confidence that this is the profile and why. So we're very much experimenting. So like we focus on things like short chain fatty acids and like the easy ones, but really we've not robustly addressed the microbiome. We're working on it, but it's the lack of evidence that we want to see more robust evidence. And then in terms of the default mode network, I built a company called Kernel. We built one of the world's best brain interfaces. It uses light, time-domain functional near-infrared spectroscopy. So just like, think of like a pulse oximeter on the finger. You put a helmet on your head, and it reads out brain activity using light. And one of the experiments we did is I did ketamine with this on my head. And so I measured my default mode network for 30 days before the therapy. I then did ketamine with the brain interface, and then I did 5 days post looking at my brain. And the data we saw, because typically when someone does ketamine, you'll go through a post administration. They'll say, how was the experience? What did you like? What did you think about? So it's a subjective talk therapy. Whereas now we had data. And what we saw was from the 30 days prior to measurement, my brain patterns were very fixed, right? Like you could imagine like the map we have, like think of the globe, like a planet Earth, and there's airports everywhere. There's Tokyo to New York, and there's that traffic. But there's a lot of traffic there, whereas less traffic from two smaller airports. So my brain had these large traffic patterns of what was going to different nodes. And then when I did ketamine, I did an intramuscular injection, it wiped all of my patterns. So it's almost like you just take all the airports in the globe and just put them in random places. I had brand new patterns. And so that was also my lived experience where my previous thought patterns were basically just now open to new thoughts, new ideas, new ways of being. So the data matched my subjective experience. And then on day 2, 3, and 4, or actually day 3, 4, 5, my patterns started closing back. So the airports went back to their stations. And so that's why there's this therapeutic window when you do a psychedelic where there's this opening where the brain is open to restructuring, but then falls back into its patterns very quickly. It was the first experiment in the entire world that showcased that this pattern emerges. You can quantify the default mode network, and that also that there's age-related patterns. So we just beat fMRI as the gold standard of using age quantification for the default mode network on brain activity.
Any experience with psilocybin or microdoses of LSD?
We haven't yet. It's illegal in the US. So we need to figure out how to do it. We've wanted to use psychedelics. There's not a lot of evidence on psychedelics and longevity, which is our primary objective. But we're very open and wanting to experiment. We just need to do it in a legal way.
Psilocybin is used for people with advanced cancers to help to cure their depression as well as give them a positive outlook towards death.
Exactly.
So I completely agree with Bryan that sleep nutrition is the key to aging with exercise. My question to Bryan is, how is biological clocks and sleeps entrained? Because getting natural sleep is the most difficult thing on planet Earth. So what are his strategies to get good normal sleep for good 8 hours?
Doctor, I've got some...
I'm an endocrinologist by profession and a researcher by occupation.
Yeah, so I've got 5 suggestions for you, doctor. So I had mentioned before, I achieved the best sleep score in human history. So I achieved 8 months of perfect sleep according to a wearable. And no human had ever done this before. And there's those 5 things I did and 5 things you all can do for similar patterns. So here we are. So first is to reframe your identity that you are a professional sleeper. So just like you take being a doctor as very seriously, you show up on time to your appointments, you treat your patients with care, that you treat sleep with a similar level of respect, that you are a professional sleeper and you don't do it when it's convenient, you don't do it when you're done watching your show, you treat your sleep like you was your profession. Number 2 is the last meal of the day is at least 2 hours before bedtime, if not earlier. So I currently eat 9 hours before I go to bed. So my bedtime's at 8:30. My last meal of the day is around 11 a.m. I do that because my primary digestion is done by the time I go to bed, and my resting heart rate is 44. When my resting heart rate is 44, I'm going to have a perfect night's sleep. If I eat food later than that, and especially like a carb food, then my resting heart rate increases to the low 50s, mid 50s, and my sleep will decline by 30 to 40%. And so last meal of the day, at least 2 hours before bed, if not earlier, 3, 4, 5. Try to move back, you'll see your sleep quality increase. 3 is consistency. So if your bedtime is 10:30 p.m., be in bed plus or minus 30 minutes every night, so either 10 or 11. The more accurate you can become, the better your body's going to respond. 4 is be mindful of your light environment. So blue lights are very bad, so screens are off. Try to have reds and ambers in the house, the lights. And then 5 is a wind down routine. This one's very important. This is like a meditative practice. So when 7:30 arrives, I will engage my sleep mode Bryan. That means he is the guardian of my preparation to get sleep. So that means when I have a thought about business, that a new idea I'm excited about, or I have an anxious thought, like something I did wrong in the day that I'm ruminating on, or some other problem I have to solve in life, I have to say, thank you, ambitious Bryan, or thank you, anxious Bryan, and say, I'm going to write this down, and tomorrow we're going to address this. But you're trying to resolve your internal conflicts so that you can settle down in that last hour. And when you go to bed, your head hits the pillow, and you're reconciled with the day, and you can sleep throughout the night. If you don't do the reconciliation, your head will hit the pillow, and then all night long, you're going to ruminate on those ideas. You'll think about them all night and stay in light sleep. So you have to basically work through your day's reconciliation and be ready for bed. Then that 1 hour time window, you can go for a walk, read a book, do a meditative practice, do something relaxing. But if you do those 5 things, it will produce the best sleep of your life. Professional sleeper, last meal of the day at least 2 hours before bed, if not earlier. Try 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Go back in time. Consistency, light, and wind down routine. And those are by far the best performers to increase sleep. And in doing that, a lot of my friends who had sleep problems before, they got rid of them, including medications, because their body was able to then naturally get into a rhythm and fall asleep and stay asleep.
So you said your near-death experience was like flying a plane, but during any of your experiences, have you had any bad experiences or something that went wrong?
When
You're experimenting a lot with you.
Yesterday, when I got picked up from the airport, the driver was driving to the hotel, and his phone rang.
Near death.
And I thought, okay, what's going to happen? And it rang once, and he looked, and it rang twice, he looked twice, and he reached over and I said, sir, can you please not answer your phone while you're driving this car? We were on the freeway driving, 60 kilometers an hour. And he picked up his phone, he's like poking at it, said, sir, could you please put down the phone and drive? So it took a little bit of interaction, but he did put down the phone and keep on driving. That was my near-death experience. Yeah.
And on the matter of carbs versus protein, so from a public health point of view, or if you look at nutrition from a combating hunger point of view, carbs are obviously a lot cheaper than protein by and large.
Yeah.
So can it work as and in your protocol, of course, carbs are largely a no-no. So can it work as a public health recommendation if you want countries to switch away from carbs? Is that practical?
That's a great question. I don't know.
But for longevity, unequivocally, carbs are bad.
Yeah, our objective has been what protocol can produce the best biomarkers in the entire world. And this is not to say, again, like that this is the only way to do it. It's just a way of doing it. There are potentially other ways of doing it. And carbs could be part of that story. You know, someone could do the experimentation. So it's a good question.
Also, I mean, do you have the same protocol as your son, or it varies with age? Is there a...
Yeah, there are some differences between what we do, but we have more in common than we do difference. Like Kate Tolo, who is right here, she also did the Blueprint protocol. She was the first female to do Blueprint. And so a lot of people, their baseline assumption is that there must be dramatic differences between a 47-year-old male, a 28-year-old female, and a 19-year-old male. We have much more in common than we do difference. So there are differences with females, with cycles and exercise and eating windows, and there's also a few things on hormones, but they're pretty minor differences. The same between 19 and 47. He has more calories than I do on a daily basis. He takes fewer supplements because he doesn't need to correct for age-related decline like I do, but it's pretty minimal overall.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know, you've been here in India for 2 days now. What's it been like? How's your mind and body reacting?
She's the one who did the interview.
Oh, yeah. Oh, great. Good to see you. Yeah, great article.
It was all your words.
I love being here. Yeah. And what I love being here, India is its own thing. You have your own way of thinking, of being, of interacting, of responses. So I've just loved being here and absorbing your patterns, your ways of being. It's really fresh. There's this saying that tourists are the only ones that can see truth. Right? Like when you're in a situation, you're blind to your own reality. It's like when Tocqueville went to the US, only he could see America in its true form. Otherwise, the Americans were blind to themselves. I'm blind to my own reality. So coming here, I feel like there's this freshness of insight of it's really nice to be here and just see how you do things. So I'm really enjoying it.
So you're not overwhelmed, you're still in your Zen state.
I'm really enjoying it.
Can you add some?
You wrote about the air quality in Delhi. You tweeted about it. Was it a conscious choice not to go to Delhi?
So we did have Delhi on the plan, and we decided not to because of the air quality. Yeah, the air quality is one of the things where, so the air quality in this room right now is pretty bad. So for example, this is monitoring it real time. This marker, PM 2.5, particulate matter, it's a bad one. You don't want this in your lungs. And the WHO recommendation, I believe, is 12, if I'm not mistaken. So we're about 3 times WHO recommendation indoors. It's worse outside. And so when I came here, I was really surprised that it's so normalized. Nobody's wearing a mask. We should all be wearing masks, especially outside. We have an air filter we've been taking around with us, this guy here. To achieve levels. But this is the kind of thing where when you're a tourist, you see it, but you live here and it's just normalized and no one thinks about it. In the US, we have other things we've normalized. For example, I was talking about this company that makes these cookies that have 80 grams of sugar and they're 1,000 calories. And they're one of the fastest growing companies in the US. That's like diabetes in a cookie. And Americans just love it. And so America has its own problems, its own thing. So every country has its own thing, which is contributing to the health of, the poor health of its citizens. And so, yeah, it's just really helpful to travel around the world, be immersed in societies and see what's going on. But yeah, air quality is a big one here. I think it would be in everyone's interest in India, if to clean up the air quality. Everybody would benefit.
Bryan, what ethical frameworks guide your decisions in experimenting and promoting anti-aging technologies?
The only ethic I come back to is that existence is the highest virtue for everyone. Right now, we're broken out into a society of countries. We have country identities, we have gender identities, we have professional identities, and we break ourselves off to these different groups. And we just have so much more in common than we do different, all of us. We are conscious and we exist. And so my ethics are really around this contemplation that like, this is where we're heading. And I think these old ways of understanding ourselves, of grouping ourselves, will not be relevant. That we'll figure out that we really are much more of a, we're closer to oneness than we may imagine. You know, these are the things that people oftentimes arrive at in deep meditative practices or in psychedelics, that they feel like there's less that separates us than we imagine. And I think it's probably true that we'll get closer down to that observation, just like practically, not even through a religious or spiritual framework, just like practically, we're so intertwined with each other, all of us. So it's really, that's my only ethical guideline right now.
With regard to sleep, carry a mobile phone.
I do.
Doesn't it give you anxiety?
No.
With regard to sleep, many hot countries, including India, we have a concept of a siesta, sleeping in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So does it still work if you sleep, say, 6 hours at night, but you get a supplementary 1 hour of sleep in the afternoon?
Sure. Yeah. You can find some people do biphasic, some are monophasic. So just trial your process. You can win. There's many paths to proper sleep. And the way you can measure that, so you can have any kind of schedule, but you want to look at certain markers, for example, like your amount of deep and REM. You want to look at markers like your S100B, a protein that modulates, whether you have, so when you get a traumatic brain injury, this protein spikes and it crosses the blood-brain barrier and gets and causes neural damage. When you get a bad night's sleep, the same thing happens. So if you're getting good sleep, you can look at markers in your body to say, hey, body, are you happy with the sleep we're getting, or are you mad? And so there's ways to probe at that question to say, is my sleep schedule actually working?
A bad night's sleep is as bad as like brain injury.
Yeah, so when you have a traumatic brain injury, this protein S100B increases and it crosses the blood-brain barrier and it can lead to neuron death. And so when you get one bad night's sleep, it spikes in the same way as a traumatic brain injury with one bad night's sleep.
And it can cause neuron damage.
Yep, so that's one night. And so really the negative effects of poor sleep are really catastrophic.
Your position, the three position in terms of don't die, immortal. Have you ever thought of modifying it to say 50% of this? You live 20 years. It's because if someone tells me, give up drinking completely, I say no.
Yeah.
You'll be sacked as editor. If you give up drinking, it won't work.
If they have, one red wine, twice a week, I might think, okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Die then kill.
Yeah, exactly.
That wine is going to maybe, instead of living 30 more years, you'll live 15 more years.
Yeah.
So that's a more realistic, I'm going to have my fun and I'm going to have my wine.
Yeah.
And I'm still living.
Yeah.
So have you ever thought of maybe at some point of time saying that,
A light version.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't die.
Yeah.
Is also, do you want an aging, ageless society or an ageless, aging society? But have you ever thought of, modifying your things, saying these are more achievable times?
Yeah. So this is it's a question about the future. So if we think that we are giving birth to artificial superintelligence, and that may happen in the next 1 to 5 to 10 years, and when that happens, it would be the most consequential invention of the history of the human race. And so the question for all of us in this room is that real? And 2, how big of a deal is it going to be? And what's at stake? And so we can certainly walk into this in a casual way and say, another 20 years in our life would be great. We're going to have our wine and we're going to get some good sleep. Sure. What I'm suggesting fundamentally is the future of the species is at stake. It's that big of a deal. And when we're playing with that level of consequence, our level of mindset has to be equal to the moment. And so I really am suggesting that, like, when you zoom out on this part of the galaxy and you see our little speck of dust, that we live in this little teeny planet in this little cluster of the galaxy, and it's amazing that we exist. It's a respect of that preciousness that I think we can't err in underestimating this moment. And so that's why the position I have is basically, it's not meant to be extreme, it's only meant to be accurate of, as a species, what is the mindset we need to have walking into this? And so we'll see over the coming years if what I'm saying is correct. But what I'm predicting is the world is going to move at a speed faster than anyone can realize. And it's going to leave us without answers on the basics of our lives. And we're going to need a new framework on how we cooperate as nation states, as individuals, like a new way of being, a new way of meaning. So that's what I'm trying to do, is like trying to answer this moment at the highest possible level. And I think that the other answer is, like, when you start doing the trade-off space, like, you're playing with like 20th century thinking, like that's just what you do. But now I think this moment is very different.
Personal question. You vote.
Do I vote?
You vote.
I do.
Are you a Democrat or Republican?
I don't disclose in the same way in
America, people are registered as Republicans or Democrats.
Yes. Yeah, so in the same way I don't engage in the religious debate on plant-based versus meat, I don't engage in politics as much, because I'm not trying to fight. I'm not trying to fight for a party, a country. I'm not trying to fight for anything. I'm trying to fight for existence.
Yeah.
And so I want my focus to be that. And I don't want to fight with anyone. It's a yes and to all things. Like, it says yes to every religion. It says yes to every country. It says yes to every ideology. It's yes and. We just don't want to die.